at such points in time, however close you are to your spouse, however many close friends you have, there are things that you can't discuss with them. In fact, they would get tired and bored of listening to you. So the fact that you have someone who's sort of sailing on the same boat as you gives you a lot of confidence, courage, and that emotional support is, required at all points in time on an entrepreneurial journey. So my advice to anyone considering this is, if you can, do find a co-founder. It's extremely important. And would I have done this on my own? I probably would have, but it made taking the plunge easier because I knew someone else was, aboard that particular boat along with.
We just kind of underestimate the importance of our life partner or spouse in this, because right from he or she being home minister, finance minister, then all the insurances, taking care of the kids education, all that comes seamless. Rather, you don't see the impact if you have a working spouse. In my case, I think that gave me enough confidence to do this plunge. And I always say the first part of my first inning was all because of my parents, because I studied and they made sure that I study and take up a job. And second inning is all because of what my life partner was able to do.
Hi, welcome to another episode of our podcast series. I'm Suman Ghose, and with me is Atul Nath. We are your hosts for this podcast. In this podcast series, we learn from people who've made a successful transition to something new, something different, something that they're passionate about. In other words, their second innings. Let me introduce two such people on our show today. Kasoji is a management consultant turned entrepreneur. After 17 years in the corporate world, she decided to pursue entrepreneurship by co-founding The Star in Me, a learning and development platform that helps organizations amplify the potential of human capital. Their clients include several Fortune 500 firms. She's also a board member of Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode, also her alma mater. Our second guest is Rahul Nagar. After spending over 2 decades with leading corporations such as IBM, Citi, and Fidelity, Rahul co-founded StraightBat, a sports technology company, in 2017. Rahul also has a parallel journey as an endurance athlete, embodying the same spirit of dedication and resilience. He's an electronics engineer from NIT Nagpur and a postgraduate from George Washington University. Welcome to both of you. So tell us a bit more about yourself.
Nice to be here, Suman and Atul, and pleasure to meet you too, Rahul. Look forward to hearing your story too. Like Suman mentioned, I'm a management consultant turned entrepreneur, worked in the corporate world for over 17 years before I took the plunge into the startup world. In terms of her background, I grew up in Hyderabad as part of a joint family, so surrounded by uncles and aunts and cousins, quite a chaotic but fun childhood. I'm the eldest of 3 kids. My mom is a homemaker. My father owns a construction business. He's retired now. I think a lot of who I am today has been influenced by my childhood, the things I saw, the experiences I gained. In fact, a couple of things that come to mind immediately. Like I mentioned, my father had a construction business. Whenever he, completed one of his projects, he used to take us as kids to visit those properties. And I used to see the pride on his face as he showed us, those large, huge buildings that had come up. And somehow to me, the fact that he had built something from scratch, a year ago or 2 years ago, that was just a vacant piece of land, and now you have such a beautiful thing come up on it. That seems to be some sort of a sign, about the way creation gives you a sense of accomplishment. So that sort of stayed with me throughout. And even in my corporate career, I took on a lot of entrepreneurial roles where I set up business units, set up practices, and so on. A couple of other things. I'm extremely independent in my thought process. I think I get it from my mom. And another thing that I quite fondly remember is, like I mentioned, I was part of a joint family. So my father's youngest sister used to live with us. She was not yet married at that point, and she used to tell us bedtime stories. My grandfather was quite connected, and he had a lot of friends who were IAS, IPS officers. And this aunt used to tell us their stories about how they sort of put in effort. Some of them studied under a street light to, clear their exams. Some of them walked for miles to get to their schools or colleges and so on. So that taught me two things. One, despite wherever you are, whatever your current circumstances, you can always aim high. Your dreams need not depend on where you are today. And secondly, the fact that it takes a lot of hard work to get to where you want to be. So both go hand in hand. You dream big, but you have to work hard to achieve those dreams. So that sort of formed my philosophy towards success. And so I've always been very driven, quite ambitious in what I pursue. And finally, there is one story that sort of shaped my whole life in terms of my attitude towards life. Like in South India, you see less of it today, but at least when I was studying, if you were a good student, you either took up medicine or engineering. Those were probably the only two choices that were available at that time. I wanted to become a doctor, so I was pursuing medicine. I put in a lot of effort and so on. But for whatever reason, I did not get into the institutes that were on top of my list. And at that point in time, I took a decision to give up medicine. I don't know what was going on in my 17, 18-year-old mind at that point, but I decided to move away from medicine. I decided to pursue management instead. I decided at that point that I wanted to get into an IIM. It was not easy. Of course, I had to work hard. Suman and Atul would know. At that point, there weren't as many IIMs. It was difficult to get into one. But eventually, I got into an IIM, and that sort of changed the trajectory of my entire professional life. One, because you study in a premier institute, and the way you get into the corporate world is different, and so on. And secondly, I met my husband. He was my batchmate at IIMK. So even from a personal standpoint, my life sort of changed. And later on, like Steve Jobs says, you can only connect the dots looking backward. I realized that it was probably a good decision for me to not go for medicine and take this path instead. And there is this saying by Dalai Lama, which sort of stays with me throughout. He says, remember that sometimes not getting what you want can be a wonderful stroke of luck. So, that sort of shaped my perspective about the way life unfolds. So that's it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. I like that quote from Dalai Lama. In fact, I keep reminded, and you are from a consulting background, you would know this. Consulting, we always used to joke, the guy who's sitting on the bench used to get the best opportunities, right? When the next one came up. And the others would be just stuck in their current projects, right? Super. Okay, over to you, Rahul. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Hello, Uma, Atul, Suman. So my story starts, I grew up in northern part of MP, Gwalior. And I belong to a family of teachers. Both my parents, they were doctorate, economics. And they used to take a lot of pride in teaching as a profession. So for us, it was you study, either you become an engineer or a doctor. These were the career options at that point of time. But along with that, I was a very outdoor person, as in I will spend every day, I'll spend a couple of hours just playing any game. So I used to be outside every evening. I grew up there, then moved to Indore, and we are four. I have an elder sister and an elder brother, and I have a twin brother. Now, all four of us are or rather when we started our career, all four of us engineering background and got into IT. When I started primarily my career with City, I was very keen to move out of India just to see at that point of time to see the world outside of India. And and that was my clear focus, and primarily just get used to a technology and then move outside of US. So I moved to US, I started working there, and that's where I figured out that the working style in US is very different from how it was at that point of time in India. And somewhere in middle part of 2005 or something, when I came back, I always wanted to see if I can start something own. And but by the time I took the plunge, I spent 10 years, more than 10 years in IBM, and finally decided to start a life of an entrepreneur. Started a company called StraightBat, and this is into sport technology. And the primary reason for me to pick up this field was, one is definitely my interest and passion for technology, but at the same time, my love for sports. And sports, not just as a sports what we see normally on the phone, cameras or broadcasts, but also the sports which is instrumental for fitness. So I kind of took that plunge, and yeah, here I am, more than 7 years now with the company. In this process, I myself became an endurance athlete. So my journey to start doing long distance endurance event is also as old as StraightBat. So somewhere around 2016, 15, I just started doing long distance swimming, then picked up running, cycling, and got addicted to, I should use the word addicted, got addicted to triathlons. And I make a point to spend once a quarter in an event where I can take part along with some of the best athletes in India and globally in these endurance events. More because it actually gives me a reset, it gives me a restart, and also it gives me enough ingredients for fresh thinking. I personally am a firm believer in physical exercise and making sure that that is part of your daily routine, daily regime, and you can ignore everything else but for your fitness, your health. That's just a bit about me.
Yeah, quite a coincidence that the StraightBat and the fitness, the endurance journey started together, right?
Yeah, and
Though I can always say that the corporate life is also about endurance. So that was a long endurance corporate athlete, and now you're an actual athlete.
yeah, and yesterday I actually, that's exactly how what I was thinking, because it was, again, it was just a coincidence. I think probably one thing led to another, and the endurance journey got me hooked onto the data. Okay, how important data became part of my endurance journey, and that actually got me believing in the data that we collect as part of any of the activity. And to an extent, a lot of that we do at StraightBat also. So kind of one thing helped me to venture into the other part.
So one, thought listening to both of you in terms of your personal stories, I would be intrigued to know about from each of you is that where in the journey do you think, looking back, was the first seed of a second innings or an entrepreneurship? When there's a second part to that question, which is that what aspect of it were you expecting to be the most enticing? Was it the freedom of doing it? Was it the, like Rahul, you said, the data part of it? So kind of put those things together.
I don't think it was ever on the cards if I look back on it. But I did, if someone had asked me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if I ever wanted to start something on my own, I probably would have said no. It was never on the cards. But then unconsciously, subconsciously, I guess I was drifting towards those kinds of roles even in my corporate life. Like I'd mentioned, I'd done a lot of entrepreneurial roles where I set up business units from scratch and set up practices from scratch. And that used to give me a lot more pleasure and motivation when compared to the other work that I was doing. So I guess that's where I probably got hooked on to that fun of creating things from scratch, and that sort of cascaded into the entrepreneurial journey. What I liked best more than freedom and more than anything else that comes with it is that sheer feeling of watching something come to life. You know, when nothing exists, but you bring it to life through your own imagination, effort, and so on. So, bringing something to life, creating something from scratch, and seeing it grow is something that keeps me motivated and going. Right.
I'm just going to go one layer deeper on this. And, as an entrepreneur, I've been an entrepreneur now for, coming on 27, 28 years. So one of the challenges of being an entrepreneur is, and one of my reasons for doing it is also exactly the same as yours, which is that, I love the process of building. I love the process of seeing something come to life, whether it's a brand or it's a line of business or it's a team or it's an individual. One of my greatest joys is to see people transform who work with me, right? Building people into something that they themselves didn't believe they could be. So my question in that sense, in my head and to you, is that, but that takes a lot of patience, right? It's not playing with Lego, right? That you just build something and in a short period of time something gets built, or carpentry or something like that. It takes a long time and a lot of patience. So is that something you were prepared for in that sense?
I think I was prepared for it. I knew that it takes time, but again, through my experiences in life, I realized that it's more the process that is more, it's the process that is more enjoyable than the outcome. You know, when you actually, I remember going to win an award and I'm on the stage and I get the award and I feel happy. But then what led up to that stage of me being even nominated and selected for the award, I think that moment before you achieve something is actually more enjoyable than the moment itself. And I don't know if you all, I read quite a lot. So when Rahul was talking about him being very outdoorsy, I thought you couldn't have selected two more diverse individuals as your guests, because I was a complete indoor person. I am a bookworm in all senses of that word. So one of my favorite types of books to read is autobiography, Pama's autobiography, Becoming, where she says, she talks about this thing that I'm sure all of us have encountered in our lives, where people generally tend to ask children, what do you want to become when you... And she says, I've not seen a sillier question ever, because life is not about, getting somewhere, getting to some point, and then after that, if you become a doctor, then that's it. That's the end of your life. It's the process of becoming who you were meant to be that is the most important. So I guess it does require a lot of patience. I was prepared that it would take time and take a lot of effort. But yeah, I think the startup world just keeps testing you every day to see how patient you can be. Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, so I think that there are few points I would just like to add to what Uma mentioned. In my case, since I belong to a family of teachers, we did not have anybody who had done business. Okay, in my family, so the thought of starting something was never there. When I started, let's say, working, or even at the time of studying, that thought itself was not there. I I guess when I moved to US, I kind of worked with few of the entrepreneurs who were were very passionate about what they were doing. They were primarily in the services sector. And now if I go back and look at, they are very, very successful businessmen in US. But at that point of time, I was lucky to work with them more as an employee or a colleague. But I saw the amount of hard work, the number of challenges they used to face, and the fact that they had to take decision by themselves. There was no boss, as in they could not defer any decision and say, oh, okay, my boss is going to take that decision. It's beyond my pay grade. So that was never the case. And when I realized that this is also a part of, you can actually have a career in this line. I kind of always had these people as my mentors. I was connected to them. And even when I came back to India, I used to just keep saying hi, hello, and just to understand what they are doing, where they are in their current business or growth wise. So that's where I got introduced to being an entrepreneur or starting something on your own. The trigger point for me was, I think, my passion or love for sports. I think technology was, I was pretty convinced about the technology. It was the sport. And to be very specific, we started on the cricket field. We used to play cricket. Where I stay, we used to play cricket every Saturday and Sunday. And that's where my co-founder, he got this idea, and I said, let's do it. I actually just took a plunge, left the job, and I said, let's do it. It sounds like a good idea. We'll find out how the market is reacting to it. And we took a plunge. So I think for me, the trigger point was sports.
Amazing. That's amazing. So that's a quick, immediate decision. That's quite something. And how long back was that, Rahul? How many years has it been now?
2016, 17.
And how many times have you kicked yourself for taking that decision?
That's a difficult question to answer. I don't have that count, but
yeah, no, it always happens. Yeah, it always happens. It's one of the hardest things to do. And I won't ask you the question again. I mean, but I'll tell you, in my 27, 28 years, there have been at least, I'm going to say 2,000-3,000 times that I've kicked myself. And it's not like over the years, the number of times has reduced per week or per month. It kind of, it's just a crazy journey, right? Which is what we were talking about earlier, that it's about the journey, and there will be highs and there are abysmal lows, and it's just, but I wouldn't do it any other way. I just wouldn't do it any other way. So
I mean, maybe I'll dig a little deeper. And this is what I call the move from the cold state to the hot state. Cold state is very rational. You're doing your Excel sheets, finance planning, all of that. But it's very difficult to actually take the jump, right? There are emotions involved. Real life gets in the way, all of those things. You said you had this idea right after you came back from the US, but you spent 10 years after that, right, in the corporate. What's been the main reason? Was it like you were preparing to do something, or something which was holding you back? How did those 10 years kind of, manifest?
I think it was still, that idea was back of my mind. I don't think I was preparing for it. I was just waiting for the trigger moment. And in this case, as I mentioned, sports was the trigger moment for me, and how we can democratize the usage of technology in sports. That was the trigger moment for me.
So just waiting for that right opportunity, basically, and maybe the right partner.
Yeah, kind of, yes.
So coming back to the hot state, cold state to hot state, Uma, you mentioned that this was never on your mind. And yet, after many years with Cognizant, you left. So for how long has this thought been on your mind? Number one, of being an entrepreneur. Number two, of doing something specific. How was that journey?
So I think it was more the second point. There was never the thought of being an entrepreneur, but when the idea stuck and it stuck a chord with me, that's when I decided that this was the right time. So I spent majority of my career in consulting. So I've done operations and strategy consulting, and as is typical of consulting roles, it took me around the world. So I worked across 5 continents, and irrespective of where I went, and I used to present in boardrooms and at senior leadership meetings, more often than not, I would either be the only woman in the room or be in the minority. And I used to find it very puzzling that in this time and age, there is still such a disparity at senior levels. And that got me thinking. I met my co-founder Mahua in Cognizant. We worked together for a bit and we became good friends. And during our coffee discussions, we used to keep talking about this. And one fine day, I guess it was some frustration at work or whatever. I think that thought crosses everyone's mind who's working in the corporate world that, how long should I continue this? I guess in one of those moments, I just called Mahua and said, I think we should start something in that, space that we've been talking about. And she said yes immediately. So that sort of, I think, gave me more confidence and courage that there was someone else also who was willing to sort of get onto this journey with me, and then took the plunge into entrepreneurship. So I've always been very passionate about diversity. And the second thing I also realized very early on in my career, I went to IIM as a fresher, and from campus I joined GE Capital. And I was amongst the few freshers who had graduated from campus and joined. GE used to hire like 100 people from IIMs at that point in time. And my thought at that time, I was obviously new to the corporate world, was that, if I sit in my cubicle, put my head down, very diligently do my work, I would somehow get recognized, get rewarded for the good work I was doing. But shockingly, after a couple of years, I realized that the world doesn't work that way. You need to speak for yourself, you need to make yourself visible, you need to create a personal brand, etc. So these are things that I realized over time. Nobody taught me this, neither at IIM or in the other colleges I studied at. And this is another thing that Mahua and I used to keep talking about, why should we wait for people to sort of learn the hard way that these are important things to do? Some of these should actually be taught in the corporate world, if not in college. So that again led us to this entire theme around learning and development, corporate learning, focusing more on leadership, behavioral skills, and so on. So yeah, so that was how the entire thing started in my mind.
So, you mentioned Mahua, and the other day when we had a chat, we talked actually quite a lot about the importance of a partner. And as it happens, both of you today that we're talking to have partners, co-founders. We've had conversations before where, people have been single entrepreneurs and individual entrepreneurs in that sense. So how important, and of course, I mean, having a partner in business and all has its own, and I'm not talking about the complementarity of skills and things like that. That's all great. And, we all, that's an area that's been much talked about. Would love to talk to you guys about what kind of role does a partner play in terms of the actual transition of moving from corporate to being an entrepreneur, both in terms of emotional support, in terms of developing an idea, or even if it is just to take that final plunge. So for each of you, how important was the partner? Do you think you would not have done it if you didn't have Mahua, for example, Uma, and Rahul, if you didn't have your two co-founders?
I think it's very important to have a co-founder, like I was telling Atul and Suman the other day. When I decided to take the plunge into entrepreneurship, my husband Ravi has been very supportive. I had a chat with my son, who was very young at that time, but I really value his perspective. But then through the entrepreneurial journey, right, and all of us have been on it, so we have an idea. And Atul was talking about the highs and lows, and there are so many of them, and more lows than highs. At such points in time, however close you are to your spouse, however many close friends you have, there are things that you can't discuss with them. In fact, they would get tired and bored of listening to you. So the fact that you have someone who's sort of sailing on the same boat as you gives you a lot of confidence, courage, and that emotional support is, required at all points in time on an entrepreneurial journey. So my advice to anyone considering this is, if you can, do find a co-founder. It's extremely important. And would I have done this on my own? I probably would have, but it made taking the plunge easier because I knew someone else was, aboard that particular boat along with me.
You said you already thought about it. Your husband was supportive. You spoke to your child. So again, seems like very well thought out, calculated. But was there something that happened to you which you were not prepared for? Some learnings.
A lot of things I think happened which we were not prepared for. While I knew that there would be an opportunity cost, I was giving up a steady paycheck, and I was doing quite well in my corporate career at that point in time. So I was giving up something good. And I knew the startup journey would be filled with uncertainty. And both Mahua and I, we're actually good friends. So we got down to the brass tacks of discussing how much would each one of us want to invest, what is our limit. We had discussed that and agreed that we would not take funding from anyone externally till we approved the idea. We decided we would not put our spouse's money at risk, and we would only use our funds for this purpose, and so on. So all that was carved out. But the fact of the matter is, we ended up investing double of what we had originally planned, and a lot of things sort of, went topsy-turvy. But two things I remember, that sort of stayed with me through this particular, starting period was one. There is one manager that I had during my professional journey, someone I really looked up to. I changed my jobs, he changed his job, and I was in touch with him, someone much older and much more experienced. So when I started off the startup journey, I called him and told him, this is what I've begun, and I've quit my corporate life and so on. And he said something to me that I found quite surprising at that point. He says, "You're so lucky to have been able to take this decision." And for a moment, I was wondering, here I am, going through so much tension and anxiety, and he tells me that I'm so lucky. But later on, when I gave it some thought, I realized that he was right, in the sense that I was privileged enough to be able to take that risk from a financial standpoint, from a professional standpoint, which a lot more people who may be as ambitious as me, as driven as me, may not have been able to do. So in that sense, I guess I was lucky. So that sort of stayed on with me, and I decided that, since I have this opportunity of doing something on my own, I must make something out of it. So you were talking about the emotional aspects, once you take the plunge, right? So I remember from a financial risk standpoint, there was this person, a lot of people try and give you good advice, right? The fact that it seems like a stupid decision to give up a good job and go after something so uncertain. But there was this one person who gave me such a visual sort of an anecdote. He said, think of your risk appetite in terms of take a bundle. I mean, basically take an old piece of cloth, put all the money that you're planning to invest in the company into that cloth, tie a bundle, and throw it down a well. Now, imagine your emotional state at that point in time, that you've sunk all that particular amount of money. If you think you can live with that, if that is something that is acceptable to you, then go ahead. So that was, I thought, a very good way to sort of ascertain how much risk you're willing to take. And I think after I thought about it, I was like, okay, fine. I'd rather live without regret, having given it a shot, even if it doesn't work. So that sort of influenced my decision, again, from a financial standpoint.
Unrelated to this, but one of my friends used to always tell me that, when you're making a financial decision, especially work related, and you think of 1 lakh rupees or 50,000 rupees, it's very easy to put it down, in an Excel sheet, 50,000, add a zero, big deal, add another zero, big deal. So, he used to always tell me, wait for about 5 minutes, visualize that many gaddis of notes. Think of them stacked on your table, right? And then make your decision. Because the visualization of money, for us, and I'll say this for us MBA types, they're just Excel sheets. It's just 0.00 and 00 in Excel is very, very, not very different. So, it's sorry, Uma, back to you. That visualization of money is a very important aspect of making decisions.
Another interesting thing, once we started the startup, I remember getting my business cards printed. So the business card basically said our company's name, the star in me, and my name, and co-founder / director. I went to collect those cards from Printo, and the moment I got the cards in the store itself, I was looking at it and seeing how it looks with our logo and so on. And suddenly this thought struck me, throughout my corporate career, I sort of had names like GE and Infosys and Cognizant and UBS on my cards. And the value of that business card came more from the logo, the company logo. My name could have been anyone else's name and the card would have been as valuable. And here I was standing with this new card where nobody knows the company name because we had just bought that domain like a month ago. And then I realized for once in my life, the onus is on me to build my own brand so that my brand adds value to that card, So for once, the onus was on me to ensure that my name is good enough to sort of build credibility for my company. So that's when I started taking personal branding more seriously. And I have spoken at so many events talking about why entrepreneurs should build their own personal brand. Till the company gets established, you are representing that company and who you are is extremely important. So yeah, interesting.
That's incredible.
Yeah, those are these moments, right? When the penny drops for you, you look at that card and something hits you. Very interesting. Rahul, did you have any such moments like that when something hit you? I know you're an extremely calm person, but still something that kind of stirred you up.
So my team is not going to say that I'm an extremely calm person, but I think one of the biggest challenge that I faced was in last 7 years when you apply for visa. Okay, and when you have to give your last 3 years ITR, etc. And at that point of time, and then in previous avatar, there was never a problem. There was never a question. And so some of the questions that were asked and I had to answer. So I just found it, I just didn't like it. But I think honestly, I was prepared. I was prepared for a lot that was in store for me. And it just kind of, I took 1 year at a time, 1 day at a time, and see how it goes.
That's interesting. The you mentioned about the visas. I mean, that's a very uniquely Indian problem for entrepreneurs that I'm sure we all face. That, like you said about the ITRs, or the fact that your logo on your card is not as recognizable as it was in your corporate career. These are unique problems. Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, even simple things like medical insurance, you never think of it when you're working, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of our guests talking about that 4-5 episodes ago, Suman, that one of his very actionable advice was that if you're planning to take the plunge and being an entrepreneur, please get medical insurance immediately, because that's something that as in a corporate, you take for granted, because as a company, obviously everyone has coverage, but as a personal individual, you don't. So that was a piece of advice he gave.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, let's say you have a working spouse, then a lot of those things are taken care of. We just kind of underestimate the importance of our life partner or spouse in this, because right from he or she being home minister, finance minister, then all the insurances, taking care of the kids education, all that comes seamless, or rather you don't see the impact if you have a working spouse. In my case, I think that gave me enough confidence to do this plunge. And I I always say the first part of my first inning was all because of my parents, because I studied and they made sure that I study and take up a job. And second inning is all because of what my life partner was able to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. This point has come up in many of our discussions with several guests. Of course, the monetary part definitely helps, but just support from the spouse has always it's always been important, right? I think Uma spoke to it about some time back. What are the things that we kind of assume that people who are entrepreneurs are or do is about taking risks, right? Do you consider yourself a risk taker, for both of you?
When I started, I think, yes, I took the risk of taking this plunge. But if you ask me now, I take very calculated risks, because now my actions, what I do is directly related to my company. So it's no longer the kind of, rather, I cannot take a risk that I took probably 7 years back. Here it has to be a bit calculated, but that's just me personally. Now I've become, I'm a person of details. Okay, so I just go through the details and I take a call. I just weigh in all the options. I will do my own decision support system, and then I will decide whether I need to take this, even if it's a high risk or.
Okay. How about you, Uma?
I don't know if it's about risk, but I've always, not always, but there are so many instances in life when I've gone against the norm, what is supposedly the said path or the right path or the common paths that most people follow. And I've never feared from going off the beaten track multiple times. And I've seen that it made my life, my story much more interesting than it would have been had I done what millions of other people were doing. So I think, and I love this quote, by a lady called Susie. She says, fear kills more dreams than failure ever will. So I've at least managed to keep that fear at bay. On my deathbed, I'd rather have no regrets about not trying. That's another quote, on your deathbed, you regret the things that you did not do rather than the things that you did do. So yeah, I'd rather take that risk, give it my best, and if it fails, then I at least know that I've done my best towards it.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent quotes. In fact, hearing those quotes, I get reminded of one which has made a huge impact on me. And I don't know who said this, but he said, a ship is safest in the harbor, but a ship is never meant to be in the harbor. It's meant to travel the high seas, right? That's where the real risk is. Yeah.
Uma, if I can just ask you something, you just mentioned about this quote that about the deathbed and people regret the shots that they didn't take rather than the ones they took and that didn't hit the mark or something equivalent thereof. Why? And this quote is not it's not unique to you or to me, right? Both of us have heard it. Many people have heard it, and yet many of our friends who are in the corporate world know this quote, but probably don't take the plunge that we've taken. In your opinion, what do you think that is? Why is it that this lightning struck you and you did what you did, but many of your friends, acquaintances have not? What do you think the difference is?
I would probably attribute it to three different things. One, firstly, I think it's a lot to do with your personality, your attitudes to various things. So maybe some of us are wired that way. So that's my first summit. The second thing is, I think it also has to do with your upbringing. Have you had role models who did such things? Because had I not known that it is possible for a person with my background from my sort of native place to go and do something, maybe I wouldn't even dream that big. So it's very important to have those role models and know that some of these things are possible. And finally, I think, like that old boss of mine had mentioned, right? There is a lot, it has a lot to do, and Rahul also said, it has a lot to do with the people who are around to support you. So the amount of support you get from your spouse. I'm very lucky to have met my husband Ravi in college. We have a similar mindset, and I know he encourages me in whatever I do. So having that supportive ecosystem, I think, makes a lot of difference. Not everyone can do that, and that's why I remember this person telling me that it was actually lucky that I could take this decision and lunch. There might be many more people who are as courageous but are unable to do it because of their family circumstances and so on.
Do you think it's easier to do in your 20s or your 30s or your 40s? Random question. I mean, and same for you, Rahul.
Yeah, we keep discussing this, and I know research shows that the most successful ventures are the ones who are started by founders in their 40s. I think there are pros and cons for each. Where if you do this in your 20s, you're taking lesser risk because your opportunity cost is probably that much lower. I think one good thing, in my view, two good things actually to do it later in your life is, one, you have hopefully made enough wealth to create that cushion that enables you to take a financial risk. So it's you can survive without a salary. Secondly, if you've invested in building the right network over your career or of whatever 10, 15 years, then you would notice that those networks and those connections actually help you significantly as you try and grow and scale your startup. So I think these two are advantages that I think I had since I started this after 17 years of my corporate life.
So Atul, it's interesting it's coming from you, because amongst the four of us, you're the only one who started in their 20s. So it'll be good to hear your perspective also. Now that you think, when you look back, if you had to do it again, would you do it in your 20s or would you do it later?
Boy, I don't think I've ever answered that question before. Now that I'm thinking about it, Suman, there's two aspects to that, and both are related to the point that Uma made. The first one is that when I was 24, 5 years old when I took the plunge, and I was young. I did not know better. I had very low opportunity costs. Going by what Uma says, I think it would have been something that would have been useful. The networks, to some extent, the rigor. I think there was a slight, in my early years as an entrepreneur, there was a slight lack of rigor, lack of discipline. It was too early. I was too young to really know how to set up processes. I was doing it based on logic rather than experience. It's like, so it was, but one of the things I put in place at that time was I learned a lot from our clients, because even at an early, we were working with very, very good companies in terms of processes, like a Pepsi, like a Unilever, like companies like that. So, they had great processes, and our clients were very open in terms of willing to, share with us how we could make our organization stronger, even though we were very, very young. So, Suman, it's interesting you asked me that, because, it's not a question I've answered very often before, but what's one of the, and they're very much related to the 2 points that, Uma just made, which is that, when you're young and in your 20s, then your opportunity cost is a lot less. So, I was able to do it without worrying too much about what is the kind of salary I was foregoing and things like that. And of course, the fact that, I was young, I really did not know too much about what I was getting into. And as I always say, this is, the mid 90s, when India was just liberalizing and the world was different. And, you didn't really have the crazy opportunities in the corporate world that you have today for young MBAs, so to speak. And the second aspect is that, since I never really worked in corporate, I don't know what 8 or 10 years of experience may have given me through my mid 20s to my mid 30s. So I don't know, yeah,
According.
his side has views.
Because
Right. So yeah,
Okay,
so I think
Atul, over to
maybe
you.
I would have been helped by the fact that I would have built up some networks. But the most important thing, and Suman, this is related to your favorite subject on cold state versus hot state. I think I did it when my state was just right to do it. Had I waited another 5 years or 8 years, maybe I would never done it. Because, I would have gone into a corporate, I would have started building my career, I would have, gone this, done this, maybe gone to another country. Who knows? I mean, where I would have landed, and maybe I would have never done it. So I think the timing was just fine and just great.
No, I completely agree. I think it's what Anshu told us in the previous episode about seizing the moment. I think there's a perfect timing for all of this.
If you were to kind of do this transition and this journey again, what are the things you would do exactly the same? Because those were things that, you did right and you enjoyed doing and they worked out well for you. And along with that, what are the things you would do differently? Because you feel that, you could do it better if you do it differently. Uma, please go ahead.
So there are two things I would have done differently. One is maybe build a minimum viable product first instead of going full on and investing in technology before knowing whether it'll click or not. So that led us to pivot later on and so on. So in terms of financial as well as time aspects, that I would probably have gone with an MVP first. Secondly, I think it would have helped to have a technology expert either as a co-founder or as a core team member early on. That would have again helped a big deal, because otherwise, while you can, all the rest of the functions, whether it's marketing, finance, are things we've learned in our B school or experienced in corporate life. But for technology, you need a core skill set. So that is one thing I thought would have made a huge difference. In terms of the rest, I guess it's been a great journey from where we started to where we are today. So having a co-founder, pursuing something which I was really passionate about, and this thing about networks, having a strong network also helped us get our initial few clients. And the fact that we have so many Fortune 500 clients is also owing to the fact that network and credibility built over time actually came in handy.
Quick question on the technology part. I think this is one thing that every startup today wants, right? End of the day, almost every business is a technology business.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that you should get another co-founder who knows the technology, or is it something that you can just get advised by somebody from the outside? What do you think would be a good way to do it?
I think advice may not help as much because you need someone who's there all the time. So best case is to get a co-founder who is a technology expert. Otherwise, at least hire someone in your initial team who has enough expertise and give them a stake in the company, because you need someone who is almost full-time with you.
Yeah. No, the reason I'm saying this, while technology is so important, but the way, and we know this from the consulting world, the tech guys think very different from business guys. So somebody who's very good at technology may not have much interest in the business part of things. So that's another challenge.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, it's it.
Over to you, Rahul. What would you do differently and what would you do the same?
Yeah, if we go back and if I get a chance to do anything differently, I think I will handle my personal finances a bit different than what I did in last 7 years. And definitely I would have started much earlier than in 40s. I kind of think on a personal front, starting early is much better. But once you have crossed 5 years in a organization that you have built, the success of the organization improves if you are in your mid 40s. But for an organization, a seasoned entrepreneur is much better, is what I feel. Let's say you start in your 40s. For an organization, that's a preferred option.
Interesting.
Okay.
Very interesting. So there's a lot of different, kind of aspects that we've learned from each of you. Both of you have talked quite intensely about the importance of people around you, intensely about making sure you are full into what you're doing with the experience that you have. I really do appreciate a hell of a lot the amount of time you've spent with us, your patience, and most importantly, as I always say to all our guests, your vulnerability, your willingness to share your personal stories and your learnings and your experiences. Thank you so much for your time, both of you, Uma and Rahul. I look forward to connecting with each of you individually and learning more about your businesses. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Atul. Thank you, Suman.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.